bit of feedback going on in the background. But yeah, thank you for joining today's panel presentation, Solidarity from the Third World Liberation Front to the Black Lives Matter movement, where we'll be looking at the 1968-69 strikes at San Francisco State University and UC Berkeley, and the Black Lives Matter movement. And yeah, cool. So to get started, hello, my name is Janie. I am a staff at Eastwind. I am a rising fourth year UC Berkeley studying sociology and ethnic studies. And I am also a co-editor of one of the featured books of today's event, Power of the People Won't Stop, the legacy of the TWLF at UC Berkeley. And I'm really excited to moderate today's panel, which is hosted by Eastwind Books as part of the Association for Asian American Studies Book Fair. Yeah, so to get started, here are our panelists. We have Juanita Tamayo Lott, author of The Golden Children Legacy of Ethnic Studies, San Francisco State, Dr. Lineta Warjack, Native Resistance, An Intergenerational Fight for Survival and Life, and Harvey Dong, co-editor of The Power of the People Won't Stop Legacy of the Third World Liberation Front at UC Berkeley. So I'm very excited and honored to host this panel here today. So to get started, we thought it would be fitting to kind of set the tone and the context for this conversation today with kind of defining the origins of the term third world. In The Power of the People Won't Stop, I wrote a little bit about the 1955 Bandung Conference, and I began with a quote from Vijay Prashad, who wrote, the third world was not a place, it was a project. During the seemingly interminable battles against colonialism, the peoples of Asia, Africa, and Latin America dreamed of a new world. So the term third world refers to, I guess, quote unquote, developing countries like Asia, Africa, and Latin America. But like the quote mentioned, third world is at the root of it anti-colonial and anti-imperialist. I would like to go back to the Bandung Conference in 1955, where political leaders of 29 Asian and African nations met in Bandung, Indonesia, to talk about human rights, peace, and self-determination in the face of colonialism, and kind of the role of the third world during a time of the Cold War, and talking about the economic decentralization of resources. And really, it was kind of the first large-scale Afro-Asian conference or meeting, and it kind of held greater significance as kind of the alliance of countries who had experienced colonialism, and how it established what people call a new world consciousness, or kind of the starting point of a decolonized way or framework of looking and analyzing the conditions of third world people. So I feel like Bandung may not resonate as strongly as it did during the late 1960s, but it had definitely profound influence in kind of laying the frameworks and the political landscape that the Third World Liberation Front emerged from. So yeah, if you're interested in learning more, I believe Eastwind has a book called Indonesian Notebook that talks more about this historical moment of kind of transnational solidarity against colonialism, and tying it back into the TWLF at SF State and UC Berkeley. What strikers did as they shaped their demands and visions was not just look at colonialism and imperialism abroad, but also bring an analysis to kind of how these, I guess, like colonial and imperialist policies and systems impacted their own communities in the United States, how forms of colonization and imperialism manifested in their own communities and own racialized communities and on their own campus, for example, through racial profiling or surveillance. So as we move into this conversation about the TWLF and its trajectory and connections to the Black Lives Matter movement, it's important to situate it within kind of the larger, long-fought struggle of historically oppressed communities for self-determination, a struggle that takes place within the US and also extends well beyond it. So on that, I think I covered it. I won't take too much time away from our amazing panelists, and as I'm sure we're all very eager to hear from them, who are all veterans of the TWLF strikes and have continued to really pave the way for ethnic studies. So yeah, to dive right in, how this event will go down is that each of the panelists will give their own little talk and presentation, and then we'll go into Q&A. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat box and we can address it afterwards. So with that, I want to introduce Juanita Tamayo Lott, the author of Golden Children, Legacy of Ethnic Studies, SF State, a Memoir. She grew up in the Fillmore, Japantown neighborhood of San Francisco in the 1950s. She was part of the historic 1968 SF State BSU TWLF strike and served on the planning committee for the School of Ethnic Studies in 1969. Coming in full circle, she served on the planning committees for the respective 50th anniversary commemorations in 2018 and 2019. And along with her expertise as a demographer and her expertise in statistics and sociology, Juanita also co-founded Filipino American Studies at the University of Maryland in 2007. So if you can all welcome me in introducing Juanita.
Okay, thank you very much, Janie, and thank you to the Association of Asian American Studies and Eastwind Books Berkeley, and particularly my tech staff with helping with the slides, Erica and Janie. Hello from Seattle, Washington. My remarks today are going to be limited to the BSU, that is the Black Student Union, and the TWLF, Third World Liberation Front at San Francisco State. And my time period is going to be 1968, when the organizations that comprise TWLF came into being, as well as to the strike. And then I'll cover up to our 50th anniversaries in 2018 and 2019. Now, I recognize that we have collaborated and we are in solidarity with the University of California, Berkeley, and all the other California colleges and universities, also all across the United States that had BSU and TWLF components. I wanted to particularly give a shout out to the community college, because sometimes they get left behind. And also, the other thing to recognize is that the San Francisco State TWLF experience, as Janie alluded to, is part of the greater student movement internationally going on in the 1960s, that it wasn't just the United States, it was all over the third world and the first world. And then my book places the San Francisco State experience within the context of it being, and this is really important because it gets left out a lot, that it is the northern, west of the Mississippi, an urban component and follow-up to the civil rights movement in the South, which was rural. And there's a whole section in my book that discusses that, because sometimes that doesn't come off. We talk about colonialism, but there's also internal colonialism. The student organizations that comprise the TWLF sort of formed, there was an evolution, and I'll show that when I get into the slides. They started off with a very few organizations, then expanded. So when the strike happened in November 1968, the organizations under the TWLF were the BSU, the Black Student Unions, LASO, the Latin American Student Organization, MAS, the Mexican American Student Confederation, PACE, the Philippine American Collegiate Endeavor, ICSA, which is the Intercollegiate Chinese for Social Action, NASO, the Native American Student Organization, and APA, the Asian American Political Alliance. I'm going to share 3 points with you in my discussion. The first is why I wrote Golden Children. The second is why the San Francisco State strike succeeded, and we have ethnic studies through 5 decades. And then I want to end by providing some guiding premises from that event over 50 years that are relevant to not just the Black Lives Matter movement, but to other 21st century social movements. Why I wrote Golden Children. Golden children, what does that mean? There are 3 definitions to it. Golden children has to do with when you look at the United States, and particularly when you look at California, you know, we are all the colors and we all become golden. The second reason was because I come from California, which is what? The Golden State. And then the third reason is that I had to get the book out with Harvey's help, enormous help, for the 50th anniversary, the golden anniversaries of the strike in 2018, ethnic studies in 2019. So that's why it's called Golden Children. But I think we're all golden children. The reason I wrote the book is because, you know, this strike is the longest student strike in US history. And until I wrote my book, you know, no one had really talked about it. And the important thing is that the leaders of the strike were people of color. We were the TWLF, and there was white people who were following us. They were the followers. You know, the decision making comes out of the TWLF, and the white student organizations and SDS, other white organizations on campus said, yes, we would follow the lead of people of color. So that's very, very unique to San Francisco State. But the other reason is nobody who had been in the strike, you know, who had been an active participant in the strike or who had been actively participating in establishing the College of Ethnic Studies had written a book. When people talk about the San Francisco State strike, they look at the videos, right? There's a whole lot of videos. Anybody can get on the San Francisco State University Library, look at the strike archives and look at the labor archives. And in particular, you can look at DIVA, D-I-V-A, which stands for Digital Image and Video Archives. The problem with the videos is there is no context. You can look at those videos and you don't really know chronologically when stuff happened. You don't know whether some of those videos actually come from other campuses. And then what hit me most was like in 2016, another video came out. It was a documentary called Agents of Change. It's a documentary film by Abby Ginsberg and Frank Dawson, who wanted to tell the story of the struggle and the protests at Cornell University when in one weekend in January 1969, the Black students with a few other minority students tried to take over, and they did. They took over one of the buildings at Cornell University. But Cornell University is what? It's an elite university. It's also in the boonies. It's in rural upstate New York, and it was mainly white, and they recruited, you know, Black and other minority kids. So for Abby and Frank to put their, you know, that wasn't enough of a story, a weekend at Cornell. They had to build it around what happened with the largest student strike in history. And so they put it in San Francisco State. So when it premiered in San Francisco at the Castro Theater in 2016 in May, it was a standing room only. I was one of the few people who was able to be on the stage. I'm also in the film. But Jenny Lim, who's a poet in San Francisco, came up to me and she goes, you know, Juanita, what happened? It's only you and Roger Alvarado who are the non-Black people of color. What's this all about? You know, where's the representation of women? Where's the representation of non-Black minorities? But the other reasons I wrote this book, and so, you know, that so I said, okay, Jenny, we'll make this right. We'll put it all in. But the other reason I wrote it was because, you know, as I thought about Jenny's question, is there were hundreds and thousands of people, you know, who are unsung heroes and heroines who went on strike, who supported the strike, not just the students, but people from all over the world, people from all walks of life. You know, our parents were on the picket line, our religious leaders were on the line. And in Golden Children, I talk about specific people and specific roles. So you can look at real people and what they did. The other thing was, from there you segue to, you know, it's great to go on strike, you get busted, you lose a job, you might lose credit. But the other thing is that, yeah, strike is hard, but that was only 5 months. You know what's even harder is trying to establish and maintain an institution for 50 years, especially when it's an alternative institution like the College of Ethnic Studies, which really tried to ensure that our institution paid for by taxes was relevant to the students and that it served the public good. And so, you know, the history of ethnic studies, not just at San Francisco State, but all over, is that you're always trying to deflect 1,000 cuts. Another reason I wrote the book is because I didn't want it to be an academic readership, because ethnic studies is not for academia. Ethnic studies is for people to be able to have self-determination and to live their potential. And so I wanted to display the documentation. You know, by training, I'm a demographer researcher. I come from the federal statistical system. So data quality is really important to me. And so when people talk about the strike, they don't tell you what the documentation is. My book gives you footnotes, both analog, I went through all the different archives, as well as the digital archives. So for people who want to do real research, to go to primary resources, look at the footnotes. And then the last thing why I wrote this book was because I wanted to show that the legacy of San Francisco State was not just on campus, it was in the communities. And the first place, what I did for me to go off campus was that I focused my work over 30, 40 years in the legitimating institutions of power in Washington, D.C. You know, I'm from the federal statistical system, including the US Census Bureau. And the Census Bureau, since the 1970s, has used the categories that came out of San Francisco State. And, you know, it used San Francisco State as the benchmark for how do you go about creating the federal racial and ethnic advisory committees that came out of the Census Bureau. And then the other legacy off campus, and I will defer to LaNada on this, because that's what her talk will be about, is our other legacy off campus is Alcatraz. You know, and I wanted to just ensure that the American Indians from all the University of California campuses were in collaboration with San Francisco State, with the American Indian Studies programs. And I want to mention Richard Oakes and Wilma Mankiller. Wilma, who went on to be the first woman chief of the Cherokee Nation. If you go to Alcatraz, you can see an exhibit that was done in collaboration with the National Park Service, the American Indian Studies Department at San Francisco State, and the Cesar Chavez Institute. So my second point is, why did the strike succeed? I attribute the success of the strike for ethnic studies and the fight to the uniqueness of San Francisco. It was then in the 1960s a strong union town and residents of long-standing immigrant communities, especially from across the Pacific and down across the Rio Grande. Furthermore, Bay Area, California residents had grown up disciplined in hierarchical institutions, namely the military. Several members of the Third World Liberation Front Central Committee were trained in the military. They were veterans of the US Army, just like a lot of our fathers were US veterans. We were also involved in the international labor movement. You know, the Filipinos really are known for their international work in particular, but our fathers, and again, a lot of our fathers were involved in the international labor movement and the local ones in the Bay Area. And then of course, a lot of us come out of the Catholic Church and other religious places, where we are told that, we're not just there for social justice, but for compassion. Furthermore, we had organized communities of colors. We comprised a critical mass in our neighborhoods. Some of us were interracial and interethnic, and we were commuter students. Again, that's important. We went home at night and we went back to the hood. We looked at San Francisco State as a public institution that was paid by our parents' taxes. It was our campus, so we thought globally and locally. So let me leave you with 4 premises that guided the Third World Liberation Front at San Francisco State and endures in the College of Ethnic Studies and can be enduring lessons for not just Black Lives Matter, but also other 21st century social movements and the continuing fight for ethnic studies all over. We were an organic movement. So the 4 premises are: first, we the people. That means all the people, just like the census, it's all the people. We believed in coalition building. We believed in community solidarity. The second premise is serve the people. What we did in TWLF, and this is exemplified in the Central Committee, is we looked at ourselves as servant leaders. It wasn't about individual egos or divas. It was the collective. It was the TWLF Central Committee organized as a very democratic centralization. They rotated the leadership and the spokespeople every 4 months so that you never focused on the individual. It was the group, and it was a coalition of conscience, a coalition of conscience. The third premise, a people united can never be defeated. A people united can never be defeated. The corollary, of course, is a people divided can be defeated. And our last premise was that failure is not an option in a society that chooses to be a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. And with that, I would like to turn to some of the slides that you can see. Thank you so much, Erica. The first one is the dedication. And what I dedicate this to is to the children and grandchildren of the people who went on strike, so that they don't forget, they don't ever forget there's an institutional memory of who we are and our place in the United States. So that's the dedication page. And then we can move on to the next slide. This is our symbol. Look at that. We're all different colors, but we all come together. I think that that is such a powerful image. Relevant education, and that was, introduced at the 40th anniversary of the strike. Thank you. Let's go on to the next slide. I wanted to show you who some of those leaders were from the community. You probably recognize the tallest man there. That's Ron Dellums. Ron Dellums was an alumni of San Francisco State. So that was really powerful to have him from there. But then he went on to be, in the US Congress, and he fought against the Vietnam War there, and he was also the mayor of Oakland. To Ron's right is, Dr. Carlton Goodlett. Dr. Carlton Goodlett was a physician who served the community, but more importantly, he was the publisher of the Sun Reporter, a local newspaper. The man with the megaphone was the BSU chair, Benny Stewart. And Benny Stewart was a dad. There's a beautiful picture of him and his new baby during the strike. And to Benny's left is Ben Williams. Ben Williams was one of only 2 Black reporters at that time, the other being Belva Davis. And when you go through the photographs in the videos, those will be the 2 reporters that you see. Okay, thank you, Erica. Let's go on to the next slide. I wanted to show this to you because in March 1968, there were only 4 TWLF organizations at that point. It wasn't evolving, it's evolving, it's dynamic, it picks up speed as we go along. And a lot of these organizations really hadn't existed before then, because a lot of student organizations used to be social clubs, but now these organizations became very politically involved, and they provided service to the community. So if you look there, you see LASO, you see MOSC. It was called organization rather than confederation. They changed. Black Student Union, like PACE was called an organizing committee with Pat Salaver as leader at that time. And people began to coalesce, especially around Dr. Juan Martinez and George Murray. Thank you. So that's March 5th. Okay, and then the next slide, I wanted to show you when people look at the BSU TWLF committee, they basically show the black guys, which is fine. But remember, TWLF, the late Tony Miranda from LASO, very pivotal person. The person who's known the most is Roger Alvarado. Roger kept us together, and he represented everyone well, and he's such an inspiration to all of us. And then I wanted to mention Penny Nakatsu. Penny Nakatsu and I went to Morningstar School in Japantown. Penny was one of the few women on the Central Committee, along with Carmen Carrillo. And Penny really got the Asian American community, specifically the Japanese American community, to come down and denounce Senator S.I. Hayakawa, who was put in as interim president. That was really brave. My next slide is that 40th anniversary, where we had the fist. We also had see the back there where we're all united again. I want to show you that. On the right, there's a young woman there, and she just made us proud. When she came to San Francisco State, a freshman in the fall of 1968, she was Carlotta Simon, one of the most energetic strikers ever. And she changed her name to Darmira Ahmed, and she retired as a principal in the Oakland school system. Sadly, she passed away very young. And of course, the feisty woman next to her is Lorene Chu. Lorene Chu was in jail for almost a month. And Lorene, went on to be the associate dean at the College of Ethnic Studies. And I don't know the gentleman behind her, but the man with the glasses with his arms folded is Ron Kittichai, who was one of the Central Committee chairs of the TWLF. And he retired as one of the first Filipino-American Superior Court judges of California. And then there's Penny Nakatsu speaking up for all of us. The man behind her is Harry Dillon. You may know of Harry Dillon and his work with Transamerica. And next to Harry, I wanted to point out to you the faculty. This is Joe White. There were 4 Black administrators at San Francisco State during the strike. Joe White, and you can read about the rest of them in my book, but Joe White stood up, and then they all resigned. They all resigned after. But he went on to head up the Association of Black Psychologists, and he has mentored people all over the world. I'm sorry I don't know the gentleman next to him, but in the front to my left is Jerry Varnado. Jerry was another leader in the BSU and on the Central Committee. And the man in the back is the very humble Ken Montero, who was the dean of the College of Ethnic Studies until 2018. And he's the one who actually said, we need to recognize our strikers and the people who set up ethnic studies 40 years ago. He has retired, and now we have Amy Sue Wasey, who is the first woman dean of the College of Ethnic Studies over 50 years. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Juanita, for the powerful ending notes and also showing us the different folks involved in the movement. Please be sure to get a copy of Golden Children to look at the original documents and footnotes that Juanita was talking about. So next, we'll move on to Dr. Lineta Warjack. A little bit about her. She's a member of the Shoshone-Bannock tribes, currently living on the Fort Hall Indian Reservation in Idaho. In January of 1968, she was the first Native American student enrolled at UC Berkeley, where she participated in the first Native American component of the ethnic studies program. In a 1969 effort to take over Alcatraz, Dr. Warjack and other students achieved the Indian termination policies. She is currently working on projects connected to her book, Native Resistance. So, Dr. Warjack, if you would like to take it over.
Hello, I want to thank my esteemed colleagues, both Juanita and Harvey, for all the work that they've done and contributed to the history of what all people are doing. And my book is kind of an overall of history. And this picture here is coming from the genocidal era, as our people were killed so that they could take the land, which next slide shows. This picture, that picture, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, it was in the courthouse. It was a mural in the courthouse in Boise, Idaho. And that's where I got that picture. And this was, you know, some of the posters that we had to sell our land, and that's why they did us. Next. And then after the genocide and after the theft of our lands, then it was the taking of the children. And the children were legislated by law, by Congress, to be taken to Christian and governmental boarding schools to assimilate and brainwash our children into Western society. So we had that experience with the schools where a lot of our people were physically, mentally, and sexually abused, which started a whole cycle of dysfunction. And the cycle of dysfunction, coupled with the poverty under the federal system and the congressional laws that impacted us, had continued to hurt us severely. I was from the generation of Native students who was sent into the cities to continue that assimilation program. And I came to San Francisco, and then I found out what was going on in our district. I lived in the Mission District, and Mayor Alioto acknowledged Native people, and it felt really good to at least be acknowledged that we were alive, that someone noticed us. And I began working with the organizations and the groups in the Mission District when I found out about the program where Black youth were being sent to UC Berkeley through the Mission Rebels. Reverend Jesse James was over the Mission Rebels, and I asked him if he could send me to UC Berkeley too, and he said of course, and he did. He got me hooked up, and that's how I became the first student at UC Berkeley. Next. So at UC Berkeley, one of the first things we did was to try to organize, recruit more Native American students on campus. And the Chicano organization were very helpful in that respect. Isidro Macias and Manuel Delgado were two of the people that I met on campus, and they wanted me to join their organization. I told them that I was Native American, and they said, well, we're part Native American too. So We all got along well, and right after that, then they told me about the third world strike, that the Black students were going on strike, and we had an opportunity to join. And of course that made us more, we had more solidarity through all of us, because we had the Blacks, the Chicanos, the Asians, and Native American students. And there were not that many of us, but we did have the support of the white students and the teachers' unions, and everybody was very supporting. While at the same time, the Third World Strike was going on at San Francisco State as well. So the communities were all involved. We were, as Native Americans, we were kind of like the new transplants into the city. But the other organizations were already organized and trying to deal with all the oppressive forces that were impacting them in the city. So it was easy for me to join in and be a part of it, because they had more experience, and they were a lot of help. And I found out that it was with the solidarity that we had gained that we could be more effectful that way. We had a large impact. And so we all worked together and helped each other in that respect. This picture here is Manuel and the Chicano students that were leading the protests on various days. Everybody took their turns in leading the protests, and in that way we could all take part and do our turn. I just, as the Native American student leader from UC Berkeley, I was the only female, so I had a lot of help. And all the guys were very respectful and very supportive, and for Native American people, because everyone knew about the genocide and what happened to our people. And because of the California Indians as well, who were totally massacred, and the very few that were left. And of course, UC Berkeley had the museum where a lot of the bodies were kept in that museum, Native American bodies and parts and remains, and it's still there to this day and needs to be repatriated back to their tribes and their people. So Third World Strike was really a learning tool for me. And of course, we carried the strike out in a nonviolent manner. And after we successfully negotiated our Department of Ethnic Studies, then we went out, and as the Native American student group, we went out, next slide, and took Alcatraz. And we did this as a part of taking our land back and protesting the unjust laws that were impacting us. It was during a time where in 1968 they passed the Indian Civil Rights Act as a part of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, because we had been left out. That meant everyone had civil liberties except for Native Americans. So in 68, they passed the Indian Civil Rights Act, but it had never become a reality. And in 1969, we carried out a 19-month protest on Alcatraz Island, which was an international seaport town, and of course Alcatraz had a lot of attention, and we protested the broken treaties, the laws that were not enforced that supported us, and the policies and regulations through Congress which regulated us in our daily lives on the reservation, and the move to the relocation to continue the assimilation program. So I was 18 when I came out on relocation into the cities, and I didn't know much, so I had to learn from everybody, and it was a fast learning experience to go through, and we just kept on, and Richard Oakes was the chair of the Native student group at San Francisco State, and I was the chair of the student group at Berkeley, so we put our organizations together and we went and took Alcatraz. And then we came back with all of the students throughout the state of California and maintained our 19-month occupation. That sign there, warning, keep off Indian property, what happened there was we just took, it had US property, so we just wrote over it and maintained our occupation. And during that time, President Nixon, which everybody hated, but he was our one and only president that ever did anything for Native people. And he stopped the Termination Act, which was allowing the states to take jurisdiction over tribes and reservations, and take, I think 106 tribes were totally taken away at that time. And of course, like I said, the California Indians were going through a lot and not being recognized or acknowledged. And when we took Alcatraz, we had a lot of California Native students with us. So we never thought about that this was Ohlone territory, because we had acknowledged the California Native students, and we just did it as one people, because as one people, we are a race. We're not, we didn't see ourselves as tribes all broken up into my tribe this and my tribe that. It was, an overall tribal effort. And when that happened, it stopped the like I say, the termination policy, but it also started a lot of organizations out of the country. It was like a rock hitting the water with all the ripples and waves that just impacted everybody. And we became strong. We wanted to retain our identity as Native people. It was no longer against the law. We wanted to retain our languages, our culture, our traditions, which was outlawed by Congress back in the 1890s. So we had been living under all these oppressive forces for so long that we just broke out as the young people of that generation to take some of our land back. And it has Red Power on there, which initiated our movement, which was, of course, Red Power was more of a kind of a spiritual, in a spiritual sense, because it, although our people were still trying to practice our traditions and culture, it was illegal. And the picture on my book is a picture of my father during that prohibition where we're not allowed to practice our ceremonies, and he's practicing the ceremony. So my father had a large impact on me in terms of the resistance and the fight, and which is why I wrote that book, to just not only acknowledge, but to put it down somewhere, you know, about what was happening to our people and why we did what we did as young people in this next generation. But it just turns out that we continue to fight. I'm retired, but that just means I'm working harder and not on salary either. But it just means that we have to continue that fight. Nick, could you show the next slide, please? And this next slide is from Standing Rock. Because 47 years later, when Standing Rock happened, when the tribes were opposing the federal government in their takeover of the land and putting in the pipes, the oil pipes, without approval or support from the tribes, and then through the Missouri River, which, you know, we know all those pipes are going to break at some point to endanger the water and the life source, because as Native people, water is life, and we know that, and we know the fight that we've been up against all these years. So all the tribes came out with resolutions in support of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, and we were able to maintain that occupation for several months. And a lot of people came. It was known worldwide, even though we had no media. It was all through social media just to get the information out. And it kind of brings us up to today with Black Lives Matter and what we've been up against, because we know what we've been up against since the genocide, and it's not a good thing that is happening, and we've always been resisting and fighting it. So we certainly understand, and that's probably the biggest gift I got from the Third World Strike, is to know that we can all stand together, united, and we're successful when that happens. So the Standing Rock resistance came up and is known worldwide what we're up against, because they're up against the same things now. So it's not a matter of just our fight, you know, for the environment, for the land, for the water, for the clean air, and all the pollution that's happening, but we all have to stand together again. And that's what brings us up to date with the young people today and what's going on, because we know that if we all stand together and fight and work together, but in a peaceful way, regardless of the military and everything that they bring to try to destroy us, we need to maintain that resistance. And that's primarily what my book is about. And it's just an ongoing, continuing struggle and battle. And hopefully we can try to have a good impact for our future generations, for our children and grandchildren and on. So battle goes on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lineta. Yeah, thank you for your unique perspective on Indigenous movements during the 1960s, 70s, and current struggles today, like Standing Rock. So I really appreciate it. Lastly, I would like to introduce Harvey Dong, a second-generation Chinese American who was active in the Third World Liberation Front at UC Berkeley, strike for ethnic studies, and the struggle to save the International Hotel in the late 1960s and 70s. He is currently a lecturer in Asian American and Asian Diaspora Studies at UC Berkeley and teaches Asian American history, Chinese American history, and Asian American contemporary issues. In 2016, he received the American Culture's Ronald Takaki Teaching Award, and in 2018, the Chancellor's Public Scholar Faculty Fellowship. He is currently an humanities advisor for the Oakland Asian Cultural Center's project series on social justice, and he also runs Eastwind Books of Berkeley. So I'll hand it over to you, Harvey.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Janie. I just wanted to congratulate Juanita and LaNada for finishing their works. Two important works that document the struggle for self-determination by third world peoples of color. And I'm here to talk about the book that I worked on, co-published with Janie, titled Power of the People Won't Stop, Legacy of the TWLF at UC Berkeley. But before I talk about it, I just want to think back of what was happening during the period of the strike, because I remember myself, I was active in the anti-war movement, Black Power, Black Panthers support type activities, but this was actually much more of a larger scale type of organization in which I had to go to meetings on a regular type basis. So I just remember I was part of the rotating central committee, and in the beginning part of the strike, we had conducted informational picket lines in front of Donnell Hall, and it was a very small number of us. And then we had some speaking things at Pauley Ballroom, and at one of the speaking engagements, someone said, "Go outside, Wheeler Hall is burning." And and there were like thousands of people massed outside, and there was a fire at Wheeler Hall, and it was never determined whether it was an arson fire or an electrical fire. It was inconclusive. But I overheard someone say, "Well, I know who's behind it. It's the TWLF is behind this fire," you know. And then so I just kind of said, "We didn't do it," you know. But it was a very heavy type of situation. Another situation I remember that concerned us a lot with regard to the strike was we wanted to make sure that LaNada would not get arrested, because she was a card-carrying member of the Shoshone-Bannock Nation, which meant that she was under jurisdiction of the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs, and if she should get arrested, she would be pulled off campus. So what happened is about a week later, she gets arrested, and for allegedly swinging her purse. She's like around 5 feet tall, for allegedly swinging her purse at a 6'8" Alameda County sheriff, who said that LaNada had assaulted him. The jury didn't believe him, you know. So luckily, you know, she got acquitted from that charge. Okay. Okay. So the title of the book is "Power of the People Won't Stop: Legacy of the TWLF at UC Berkeley," and the next slide, please. Yeah, so this is a march down Bancroft from University Avenue, and we were going to a UC Berkeley, well, not UC Berkeley, but UC-wide Regents meeting, where Ronald Reagan was addressing the Regents. And we were especially upset at the fact that Ronald Reagan had called Manuel Delgado a punk, and that he was not going to give in to the demands of the TWLF. The same way he was not going to give in to what was happening at SF State. Okay, so we assembled in front of University Hall, and Ronald Reagan, I think Manuel saw it, leaves in his limousine. And as he passes by the strikers, he gives everyone the middle finger. Okay, so that's how he felt about the students. Okay, and that's why the movement was so intense. Okay, next slide. My own background in terms of how I became motivated or questioning the system. My family immigration history actually goes back to 1899. My grandpa entered the US and settled in Sacramento, Chinatown, across from the railroad yard. This was during the period of Chinese exclusion, which affected my family until the repeal of Chinese exclusion in 1943. My mom was a war bride who married my father, a US Army veteran who was involved in the US retaking of the Philippines from Japan. Myself, growing up in the Sacramento area, I remember experiencing racism, a lot of racism as a result of two Asian wars, kids watching TV, watching war movies and stuff like that. And I'm the Asian guy, you know, the enemy. Okay, two Asian wars, World War II, Korean War, and then followed by the beginning of the Vietnam War. The experiences that I had growing up contributed to a growing political consciousness that led me to become politically active in the anti-Vietnam War movement, Black Panther support movement, Asian American Political Alliance, TWLF, Asian Studies, Development of Asian American Studies, the Asian Community Center, and the I Hotel struggle. But if I think about that period, you could say that it was all interconnected and meshed together. You know, the struggle at SF State, the struggle at Berkeley, and later I Hotel and Alcatraz. In fact, at the I Hotel, people were assembling supplies to ship out to Alcatraz. You know, tenants and people active in Chinatown, Manila Town. Okay, next slide. That's actually me picketing during the strike at Berkeley. I'm the guy with the black rimmed glasses in the middle. Thinner, a lot thinner back then. Okay. And next slide. The title of the book, Power of the People Won't Stop. The reason why that title was chosen is has to do with how Berkeley evolved as a result of the strike. At Berkeley, the strike was never officially called off. In fact, we never officially ended the strike. We only called a strike moratorium because we had settled for an interim department of ethnic studies. We agreed that this department would be interim, and in exchange, we would accept this interim department, and in exchange, we would call a strike moratorium. Okay, similar to the. I mentioned this to somebody. They said, "Oh yeah, that's similar to North and South Korea." Okay, and this interim department would exist pending further negotiations for a third world college. Negotiations dragged on, students moved on. Eventually, the third world college idea was waylaid, and future generations would continue to step forward based on their political climate. And that's where the theme, Power of the People Won't Stop. So every decade or so, new TWLFs emerge. Okay, and sometimes the TWLFs are like the lowercase TW and uppercase LF comes up. Okay, especially in 1999, and then that confuses the hell out of the old timers because we always see it as, you know, uppercase TWLF. Okay. Okay, next slide. Let's go back up one more. Go back up one slide. Oh yeah, so on the right here shows the mass support that we actually had during the strike. We had the TA's union. We had thousands of people come out. And this is all because of the fact that we were committed. We had the the four groups, Asian American Political Alliance, Afro-American Students Union, Mexican American Students Confederation, and Native American Students Union had a very united core leadership. And because of that united stance, we were able to gather a lot of support, multiplying, 10 to 50 times more than our actual size. Okay, next slide. Okay, so in 1969, our interim ethnic studies department and Asian American studies programs began. The administrators had hoped that we would eventually fail. They kept their fingers crossed. They didn't think that we could make it. They underfunded us, and they were just figuring that they would bide their time and eventually we would just kind of implode. They were wrong because of the fact that we always struggled to expand the budget, but whatever budget we got, I think you could say that we tried to make do with it. And the strike itself became an important beginning point to decolonize academia, because right now there's a lot of references to the strike, to that beginning point, when they talk about race and institutionalized racism. It established a liberated zone on the campus, and from there connected with struggles in the community. So you could say that ethnic studies, Asian American studies, was the beginning and not the end. The community courses, which I was particularly involved in, were most important and contributed to the formation and support of various community storefronts and organizations, including the Asian Studies Field Office, Asian Community Center, Asian Legal Services, Draft Help, Labor Support, East Bay Asians for Community Action in Oakland, the iHotel, the Alcatraz movement, Asian Health Services, 1974, that opened. One of the largest healthcare providers in the East Bay, has its roots in the Third World Strike at UC Berkeley. La Clinica de la Raza in the Fruitvale district was also another fruit of the strike. So next slide, please. So how is this book helpful? Well, in the book itself is comprised of different writings by different individuals who were involved in the strike. And it also involves current generations who are continuing the legacy of the strike. Included in the book are visuals as well. I ran into a photographer who was a UC Berkeley campus employee during that time, Douglas Wachter, who took hundreds of pictures of the strike. And he had moved to, I think in New Mexico, and I was able to get a hold of him, and he was willing to let me use the photos of the strike during that period, okay? Okay, in terms of how's the book helpful, it actually shows solidarity being built. Multiracial solidarity was established through the coming together of the different groups, along with a broad support base from white student allies. The anthology fills a historical void. In social movement histories, we hear about the importance of struggles such as the free speech movement and People's Park in the 60s, but very little about the TWLF. So we strongly felt that there was a need for this book, and if participants do not retell their stories, it could be retold inaccurately, or at worst, it becomes omitted and erased from the narrative of social movement history. Okay. The anthology is also the story of what future generations did to continue the struggle. And the strike reshaped academia then, and its legacy has ramifications on how we look at history and societal transformation today. Okay. Chapters in the strike Some examples include the intro, which I worked on, fairly long chronology of the strike at Berkeley and its connections with SF State. Origins and background. One key component of that was I got permission to use Black Panther Party archives, focusing on demand 5. We demand the right to an education about the true history of our people. Okay, and so there's a piece there. LaNada has some entries about her participation in the Indian relocation program. There's a speech by Professor Paul Takagi, who was actually one of our faculty advisors for the first Asian American Studies class, and he openly supported the strike. And there was actually a retaliation for that because what happened was they dismantled his crim school because they didn't like the way criminology was taught, and they also didn't like his role in supporting social movements. Chapter 2, the strike takes place, largely photo essay. Chapter 3, new generations. These are people who connected with the strike decades later. One is Ricky Vincent, who teaches African American studies. His mom was actually involved in the TWF strike at UC Berkeley. I think Ricky Vincent also went to SF State. And Roberto Hernandez, he talks about the 1999 hunger strike to save ethnic studies. And then I added another piece in here titled The Future of Ethnic Studies on its 50th anniversary, autonomy and self-determination are missing. This is a piece that I wrote in support of students who were protesting the demise of ethnic studies at UC Berkeley because of the cutbacks. Okay, and then New Horizons, Ziza Delgado, who graduated in ethnic studies, has a piece analyzing the 50 years of ethnic studies as a praxis of liberation. And then there's another piece about ethnic studies coalition and its work to spread ethnic studies across California secondary schools, K through 12. And let's see, so this slide here was a event held by the Save California Ethnic Studies Coalition. And I was actually attending this hearing today where they needed speakers to support ethnic studies in the California school system. I'll send you a link here. And they were actually calling for people to speak. This hearing actually will end today at 5 p.m. In particular, the coalition is concerned that Arab American studies will not be taught, okay? That they're just sticking right now to the four groups and somewhat reluctant or slow to add Arab American studies. Okay. Next slide. This is, let's see. Yeah, so in conclusion, you could say that in the 60s and 70s, the Black Civil Rights Movement, Black Power movement was an awakening that actually brought third world peoples of color together with regards to the strikes at SF State and UC Berkeley. And in the 21st century, again, we see the need for solidarity across racial lines is more important now than ever. And we do have advantages today that could assist us in that. One is in terms of social media, but second is, that's important, is that we do have historical lessons and practices from the TWLF strikes at SF State, UC Berkeley, and the different struggles that emerged to expand and save ethnic studies. Okay, it's important today to show solidarity for the Black Lives Matter movement. There's an interconnectedness that we still have today, just like we had back then, but we need to act on it. Okay. Okay, so that's it. Is there one more slide? Oh, okay. So this is from the 50th anniversary of the TWLF. Left there is Oliver Jones. He was active in the Afro-American Students Union. Myself, Doug Daniels, who is active in the strike. He teaches Black Studies at UC Santa Barbara, and then Steve Wong, okay, who is active in AAPA and community work in San Francisco. Okay, okay, that's it.
Great. Thank you so much, Harvey. Yeah, please be sure to check out the anthology for all the multi-generational contributions that the book holds. I also see that people are sharing links to the Save Arab American Studies. We will be sure to send those links and also YouTube recording of this event in a follow-up email. And now I wanted to move into the question and oh, Juanita, yes.
Yes, I'm sorry, I left out a couple of slides. And if Erica, would you mind putting up the one about agents of change, and then also the one that was done with all the strikers from UC Berkeley and San Francisco State. In the meantime, I want to show you the book that Penny Nakatsu mentioned. You know, I want to take back my statement about nobody writing a book that wasn't a striker. I was talking about people of color strikers, but the actual classic is this one, you know, An End to Silence by William Barlow and Peter Shapiro, that really puts the San Francisco State strike in the struggle, in the context of the struggle of all the students. And I also wanted to mention that, you know, my book covers an in memoriam list, you know, that we try every time we have an anniversary celebration, we try to remember those who have gone on. I wanted to say that. The other point is that out of ethnic studies, I'm glad, you know, that Harvey said those things, what came out of the studies. As Alicia Garza, you know, Alicia Garza is one of the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, and she comes out of San Francisco State. The other thing up to date is now we have another College of Ethnic Studies. It's not just San Francisco State anymore. It's Cal State Los Angeles now has a College of Ethnic Studies. And I also want to mention one last thing, that Frank LaNada was on here. Frank LaNada and I worked in Washington, D.C. You know, I mentioned the federal statistical system, but the other cultural institution that used the racial categories from, you know, ethnic studies in California was the Smithsonian Institution. You know, we have the American Indian Museum, we have the African American, you know, History Museum. We have Franklin headed up the Asian Pacific American program at the Smithsonian, and we also had a Latino program. So the cultural institutions, the statistical agencies are part of the legacy of ethnic studies. Here in this slide, thank you, Erica. On the left is Roger Alvarado. Next to him is Frank Dawson, and next to him is Abby Ginsberg. So those are the directors and producers of Agents of Change. And this is when it was shown at the Castro Theater in 2016. The people on either side of me are well-known people. Dr. Ramona Tasco, one of the leaders in the BSU. And of course, people know about Jimmy Garrett. Jimmy Garrett was one of the early people who'd come, you know, from the South to help move the Negro Students Association to become the BSU. Okay, thank you, Erica. So that's the Agents of Change. And you can Google it if you want to see that story. And the other slide, the last slide, Erica, was the one with at the Asian Law Caucus that had all the other strikers. It was the very last slide. And it features the strikers from not just, here we go. Some of the folks you may recognize. I want to to note the people to my left, Carmen Carrillo. Carmen Carrillo was one of our inspiring folks. Terry Collins was in the BSU, and you know he has a show on KPOO, and next to him is Artie Cole of the Asian Law Caucus. Let's have a shout out for all the good work of the legal work that our community organizations. To my right is Al Wong, who was one of the Central Committee chairs. And oh God, I should know these people. Well, you can see Harvey. Harvey's there between Paulo Campo from the Asian Law Caucus and Maureen Chu, Richard Wada, Estella Habal, I don't know if you're still on, Penny, and Harvey, do you know who the other folks are?
Let me see. Keith Kojimoto, he's from the Berkeley strike, and Steve Wong.
Where are they?
And then in red is, I think it's Ray Hing, who's in Red Guards. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
And is this Carl Matsushita on the left of
yeah. Carl.
So, you know, the solidarity, I love this picture because, you know, we all come out of school, we all get together. A lot of us hadn't seen each other for years, but then to be sponsored by something like the Asian Law Caucus, which was one of the first organizations that come out in ethnic studies, was just a real thrill for all of us. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thanks. Well, now we can move on to the question and answer portion of the event. Does anyone have any questions for our panelists? Feel free to drop it in the chat box. I guess as a starter question, so ethnic studies has been established for 50 years, and since then things have happened. Original demands and visions of third world studies and its curriculum has been watered down and kind of gutted by bureaucracy. So it's clear that this fight is not yet over, which is why we're having this conversation. So what do you see as new challenges, and how do you see the lessons of solidarity built during the TWLF as relevant to today's Black Lives Matter movement? So I'll open that up for whoever wants to respond.
Well, I think, like your book says, you know, we never give up. We keep on going. And I think there are 2 points we can share with the movements today, and particularly for the fight for ethnic studies, because it's not just at the university, it's also down, you know, to the elementary and secondary levels. And it's getting co-opted by the corporations. I think it's really important, and I think this was what happened at San Francisco State, is we really had to define mission. You know, you have to be focused on the mission. You can't take care of everything, so you have to pick your battles. So make sure you're really focused on the mission. And the other thing that I was impressed about was that we had multi-levels of communication and support. It was ongoing. There was a legal strategy, there was a media strategy, there was a community strategy, and you know, the defense fund, the bail people. You know, we had to get money to get people out of jail. So it was a multi-pronged approach and strategy, and people had to stay on mission because it was too easy to get involved in other agendas. Also, to conserve resources. You know, you can't fight every fight. You have to pick your battles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that the solidarity building was actually not that easy, because we had to overcome a lot of things with regards to the different race and ethnic groups. You know, in terms of being able to communicate. We actually had some groups actually had to give some things up to build solidarity. The first group that initiated the strike at Berkeley was the Afro-American Students Union, and they were running up against a brick wall, tremendous resistance from the university. The meetings weren't going anywhere. They would write proposals and they would be turned down, and they wanted student input. The university did not want that. They wanted certain types of courses and they were rejected. There was even arguments made to them that why can't you just go into sociology or history? They already have those things, you know. So it was an uphill struggle, and finally they asked the Asian American Political Alliance, the Mexican American Students Confederation, and the Native American students, like, can we come together? Because we can't do this alone. We know that you're struggling for the same thing. There's institutional racism here. How can we fight it together? Okay, so that was like a big first step. I know Manuel Delgado said that they actually had a lot of sit-ins and protests and mass arrests related to the Delano grape boycott, because they wanted to remove the table grapes, which were scab grapes from the UC dining halls. And they had sit-ins, and the sit-ins actually resulted in the establishment of a Chicano Study Center. And this was actually before the strike. You know, they were having these negotiations. But when the idea of the strike came up, Manuel, I remember, said that they had to really think it over. You know, that if they went on strike, they would be supporting this idea of solidarity, you know, third world solidarity. If they did not go on strike, they would just be on their own, you know, and it could be very divisive. So they took the route of what was more important was building solidarity. So I was just trying to think about these things in terms of, well, what if the Afro-American Students Union at Berkeley or the BSU at State did not initiate things? You know, maybe we might not even be sitting here, you know. And what propelled them was the Black Liberation Movement that was very powerful, was taking place nationally and had international ramifications. And so you could say that in terms of Black Lives Matter movement today, it's a very powerful movement. It needs to be supported. And I think whatever happens with Black Lives Matter is going to have a direct effect as far as how race is viewed and how racism is fought in this country, and also how solidarity is built. Yeah.
I think that it was very effective to have us all work together, but we still serve as role models in terms of working together, that it can happen, we can do it, and we did it. And as a result, we did get results. So I think as a tool for the future, I think that it's important to show that we did work together and that we were very effective in that manner. And it still goes on. We can all continue to work together and help each other in the best way that we possibly can.
Great, thank you so much. We have a question from the audience. So one question says, I'm very moved by the cross/multiracial solidarity from the TWLF of the 60s and 70s. As an activist/organizer, now my experience feels like there's solidarity, but also lots of fractions between racial communities. Can the panelists maybe speak to inter-community of color conflict and tensions? And how did you all get through it in the past and modern day?
Is it inter-community conflict and tension referring to Black, Asian, like the Los Angeles riots, that type of thing? Or because I know that comes up a lot, you know, especially in the present time, like because of new immigration, there's larger numbers of Asians. In 1992, the riots happened. It started off as a police brutality case, and the media was able to manipulate it and turn it into something racial between Korean shopkeepers and the Black community in South Central Los Angeles. But I think there was a divide within the Korean American community over how to handle it. One, to go by way of the civil rights agenda, or to go by way of joining with the conservative elements in the government to suppress the situation. So one was in terms of dialogue, solidarity, building, coalition, similar to what we were trying to do with the TWLF. And the other route was to go by the route of a much more conservative agenda, which actually would be sure to guarantee decades and decades of racial strife between the different communities. Yeah. So that does come up in the recent period. Yeah.
I can give you two examples. One is the Filipino American Collegiate Endeavor at San Francisco State. As you know, Filipinos love everybody. And so we marry everybody. We interact with everything. And I have to tell you, things got tense among all the student organizations. But, you know, a lot of us in PACE, we're not just Filipino. Sonny Arenado is Filipino American Indian. Ron Kitachai was Irish Filipino Guamanian. Ed De La Cruz was Mexican Filipino. Larry Giles was Black Filipino. A lot of us grew up, like I said, in segregated neighborhoods. A lot of us grew up right in the Fillmore, so we knew each other. Our parents knew each other. They went to church together. You know, they were in the same organizations. So we were lucky in that regard. But also, we were brought up to be world leaders. You know, you're not looking across ethnicity. And in some place like San Francisco, and I tell you this in my book, that's where the United Nations came together. So, you know, that was instilled in us. So that was then. And really, because the Filipinos, you know, aren't a big power, we have this gentle power so that you can go talk to the Blacks if you're Black Filipino. You can talk to the whites if you're white Filipino. You can talk to the Indopinos, you know, there's a whole group of Indopinos and Blackapinos. So we were there as kind of that bridge. And now my second example is what happened in the 1970s. As I said, the federal statistical system and the cultural institutions like the Smithsonian looked at what happened at San Francisco State, at California. And it was really exciting because they understood the changing demographics in the 1970s. And I was lucky enough to chair that federal statistical committee out of the Interagency Committee on Education. Because the people in education knew, when you looked at kindergarten and first grade, those kids were increasingly children of color. And we knew that was who was going to be our labor force. So the Census Bureau pivoted, but also in 1965, the Immigration Act comes into play. So when you look at the 1970 census, you still see 90% of the US population is white, 9% is Black, and 1% all other. And within that 1% are American Indians and Asian Americans, right? And at that point, Mexicans were like Spanish Americans, they were white. But come the 1965 Immigration Act, the growing group of children of color, the 1980 census was going to be really different. So the Census Bureau, to its credit, and the Office of Management and Budget, set up these racial and ethnic advisory committees. And that's where I learned, you know, that our fight was everybody's fight, including white people, because we were there to be counted as the American people. And I have a passage in my book where Director Vincent Baraba talks about how contentious it was to be with all these different racial and ethnic advisory committees. Everybody fought with everybody, but we also came together. And those people really taught me, the leaders from the Black, from the Asian, it was called the Hispanic speaking at that point, and the American Indian population, because they weren't interested in just having a program at the Census Bureau that dealt with minorities. You know what those guys really wanted? They wanted to control the budget and personnel. If you control the budget and personnel, you can have any program you want. And that was a really powerful lesson for me.
Like, unfortunately, we have to deal with those issues where there are those inner conflicts, and we have it within our own people. And I think we just need to look at the issues that we have to deal with and work together to support those issues. And if we're hurting enough, then we will do it. But it is a problem sometimes. And fortunately, we were able to pull it together for the third world strike. And if we were able to do it then, I think we can continue to do that. And we are all the role models for that as well. So it just takes a lot of work to get along and work with each other and be earnest and continue to do so. And that's easy to say, but it's hard to do, I know.
Yeah. So there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from the TWLF strike with regards to the building of solidarity. For one, that we looked at racism as systemic, and that we had to fight systemic racism together. You know, you can't change the institutions individually because you get picked off one by one, and divide and conquer is the most favorite tactic,
Right.
you know, used. You know, divide and conquer. And then today, I know there's some websites that seem to put a lot of photos or videos of incidents of young Black teenagers committing acts of violence on elderly Asian women. And then it kind of encourages a lot of conversation, that it shows that therefore we should not support Black Lives Matter. It shows that Black people are violent. There's lots of that kind of stuff that's very super divisive. And I think in a lot of ways it's intentional, and it has the effect of creating more division rather than looking at the institutions that create crime. And it also tends to make it a collective punishment. You know, like if an incident happens, that it's an indictment against an entire race. But I think Black Lives Matter gives us an opportunity to open that discussion more, you know, and it's important for people to speak up and write about it and talk about it. Yeah.
I want to follow up on that, Harvey's point about divide and conquer. And this comes out of the institution that's above us all anymore. It's not the private sector, it's not the nonprofit sector, it's not the public sector, it's social media. It's all the guys from Silicon Valley and that whole tech area where they divide and conquer us, they fragment us as consumer groups. You know, the opposite side of this concentration of power and resources and money in the top 1% is the deliberate fragmentation of the 99%. Because then, you know, and I hate this, like in ethnic studies, you know, there's that hierarchy of, do you have a PhD or don't you? You know, what neighborhoods, what zip code do you live in? What is your you know, what is your primary group? You know, when we were growing up, our families were our primary group, you know, the primary institutions of family, church, and state. And now we're fragmented as individuals that can be disposed of, that are treated as commodities. And so, you know, when I talk to younger people, from yesterday's session, you know, one of the young men said, you know, you were talking about unconditional love, how we all got together because we loved one another. And he says, but you know, the only love I get is conditional. And that really threw me off, because everything is conditioned. You have to be a member of something in order to get the benefits, right? This fragmentation is deliberate. It's very deliberate, and it speaks to the individual ego so that you don't look at yourself as part of a larger group, and that you don't want to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself.
Yeah, I agree with that, because that it is very intentional, because when we were on Alcatraz, for example, the government came out to us in our negotiations and told us that they couldn't work with us because we were young and militant. And I said, well, we're young, but we're not militant. This is a nonviolent action. And so then they said, well, you're urban and we work with the reservation. And I said, well, we're urban only because you put us here. Relocation program. And I said, but we're still reservation. We still have our membership in our tribes. And then they said, well, you're young and you don't have the support of the older, more responsible adult community. And so we went out and organized all the Bay Area organizations, and every negotiation, the president of each organization, which were the older, more responsible adult community, was with us. But they tried in every way to divide us. So I've heard it, I've seen it, and I continue to watch it. Unfortunately, it's very intentional.
Mm-hmm. That's the story of COINTELPRO, in the 60s and 70s, to use every means possible to divide, use every means possible to prevent the rise of African American leadership, to spread lies, and to pit one group against the other. So there's actually reports and books about that, how that's constantly going on. Because they are concerned about this idea of people coming together and discussing, face to face, and finding solutions and stuff.
Oh, yeah. Well, we thank you all for answering that. We also have another question. So the question is, I've seen a lot of rhetoric lately that posits Black versus non-Black, in which case APIs and other people of color become non-Black. Just wondering how you might help us make sense from your vantage points and experiences, which are so much more multicultural and about cross-racial collaboration. For example, I see more Black folks calling for a distinction between Black and people of color that seems contrary to the TWLF intentional work across racial groups.
That's a very important question. For a long time, like I said, in the 1970 census, the US population was looked at as Black and white. 1970 is not that long ago. And it was deliberate, right? Because of who gets to come to the United States. There were exclusionary laws. That's why we weren't here. Otherwise, this used to be Mexico. This used to be Spanish America. Asians have been coming here for a long time. The Filipino Manila Galleon trade will tell you that. But what happened, and we were really very sensitive at San Francisco State. We say BSU and TWLF for a reason, because it's the Blacks who get hit the hardest, no matter what. The other group is the American Indians. The only two groups in the United States that have a legal status, are the Blacks and the American Indians. They're federal Indians, but the treatment of Blacks has been encoded, in terms of slavery. And so that's really, really deep when you look at who has led the struggle. And if you look at statistics on disparity, there is a reason we said BSU and TWLF. Though, what's happening now with my children and grandchildren, it's people are multiracial, right? You got Kamala Harris. That leads us to the future. We've got this Asian Black coalition going on. That's a reality. And we're going to see more of that. And then, when people talk to each other, it's like, pretty soon you'll find out, hey, I'm not all Black, I'm not all Filipino, I'm not all Asian. We really are mixed. I don't know if that helps, but I just think we're in a really good move. But I think we need to respect the special status, and immigrants really don't understand this as much, about the people who were here first, the indigenous folks and the Blacks who are not immigrants.
Well, that would be especially important with regards to what's taught in ethnic studies, you know, because we can't really teach by only looking at one group. You know, it's important to look at each of the groups with regards to how their history and what's happening in the community and stuff like that. But it's important to have that comparative analysis, and also the connection with slavery, the extermination of the Indians, and then the groups that followed were the Asian Americans groupings that followed, and how one pattern was set and how that affected the others. Yeah. But Berkeley, I know, didn't have a separate BSU TWLF. We just had one TWLF. I don't know exactly the details as far as the proposal, but the group that initiated the TWLF was the Afro-American Students Union, and they did have a leading role in that coalition. Although, but as far as decision making and voting, each group had equal voting power, and the Native American students were the smallest group, but they still had 1/4 power in terms of decision making. I remember. Yeah. all 4 or 5 of you. Right?
Well, you know, Harvey, I think you bring out a really important point about the reason why we wanted ethnic studies. And that's to be able to discuss and talk about these issues that come up that causes all the divisiveness. And that's what we wanted to be able to do, is to get to all of the points of discrimination and racism and the oppression that's happening to all of us, you know. But like I said, it's very intentional to keep us divided. And of course, that's the problem we're seeing today with ethnic studies, is, you know, it's all pretty well being, let's see, what's a better term than whitewashed? Do you have it institutionalized?
Waspish.
You know, don't want to be saying something wrong here, but yeah.
But I think the students have a big role within that, because they're the ones that want to become active, or they can move around a lot quicker than us, and they can think quicker, and they can write, and they can use social media. So students have a big role, you know, in terms of the future of this stuff. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you, everyone.
Oh, I had one more.
Oh, yeah. Any final closing thoughts from the panelists before we wrap up?
I wanted to get back, you know, because particularly as we have more immigrants, you know, who are non-Black minorities in the United States, the people have to understand, you know, the history of this country built on slavery, and the people who died, you know, so that we could have things like ethnic studies, you know. And I'm thinking of Malcolm X, I'm thinking of Martin Luther King, you know, all those leaders and all the people who've written and spoken up to now. But I wanted to point out that this issue of what is Black came up when we were doing the census back in the 70s in the Hispanic population. You know, the difference between North America and South America, in they say it's more color tolerant in Latin America. But there was a big fight in the interagency committee to establish the racial and ethnic categories for the federal system, to distinguish between Black and white Hispanics. You know, that all of the Hispanics didn't want to be under Hispanic because the life situation of Black Hispanics is more like American Blacks than white Hispanics. So I just wanted to add that other kind of nuance.
Well, thank you so much, Juanita. Yeah, I guess before we wrap up, before I give out a few closing announcements, if our panelists have any final thoughts they would like to give.
I guess I'll just say that there are a lot of alignments on very different levels. You know, we have political alignments, we have spiritual alignments, social, and it goes on. But wherever we're aligned, we need to just maintain that and stay strong and always be able to tell the truth.
I think I'd like to quote Frederick Douglass. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. And so I say, you know, it's power to the people. I think, like Carlos Bulasan, America is in the heart. Our better days as a people, I believe, are still to come. Everybody vote.
Well, my final remark would be the title of the book that I worked on, and the title is "Power the People Won't Stop," and that's actually was a slogan that's been borrowed from the student movements in the 1990s. You know, when they felt that they need to organize, to bring back affirmative action. They need to organize to fight against cutbacks in ethnic studies, and so it was like a unifying slogan that has relevance with us today. Yeah. So.
Great, thank you so much for our panelists. Thank you everyone for joining. Deepest gratitude to Juanita, LaNada, and Harvey for bringing your wisdom and all the work that you've done to the board today. And also thank you for the Eastwind team for pulling this event together. This is being recorded, so it'll be shared out with you all at the end. Yeah, so I guess just to close it out, if you want to support us at Eastwind Books in hosting more of these dialogues, we encourage you to check out the speakers' works. We have a special discount code for you all, 20% off these 3 books. And I know Native Resistance is hardcover. It's a really nice hardcover. So yeah, I believe, yeah, these aren't the discounted price, so you can go on the website to see how much it would be with the 20% off. We're doing, you can order online, and we're doing curbside pickup. And we also encourage you to support our bookstore, whether that be through purchasing books, or if you don't have the financial capacity to also share events to your friends and family. As a local independent community bookstore during the pandemic, we're really grateful for the community support that we've received. And just thank you once again for engaging in this chat today. Yeah, I appreciate everyone for joining us this afternoon, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. All power to the people.